Hello, History 3553. This is Jan Kush, your TA. And today we're going to be talking about the Trent Affair, a major diplomatic event that happened early on in the Civil War. So some of the key concepts to understand is the Trent Affair um, ended up being a successful diplomatic solution to an issue the Union or the North was facing vis-a-vis Great Britain early on during the Civil War. Um, the Union or the North needed to keep Great Britain and France neutral in the war and to prevent them from openly supporting the Confederacy and coming in on and recognizing the Confederacy. That would be all kinds of issues for the Union plans. Furthermore, especially when it came to Great Britain, the Union needed the supplies from Great Britain. Great Britain was supplying a lot of arms and what's called saltpeter, which is a key ingredient for gunpowder. Great Britain was the number one supplier of both these items to the Union early on in the Civil War, while the Union was building up its industrial capacity to produce these war items. So that was another reason to keep Great Britain basically on the Union side and prevent it from going into the Confederacy. And just a little background. We're going to get to the Trent Affair on the next slide. But just understand that pretty much at the beginning of the Civil War, Lincoln initiates a blockade of Confederate ports. And what this is meant to do is prevent Confederate goods, mainly cotton, from leaving the Confederacy, and also prevent the Confederacy from bringing in the supplies it needed. It too needed arms, gunpowder, things of that nature, cannons, and other machinery and tools for the war to be brought in, because the South really didn't have the industrial capacity as much as the North did. And so the Trent Affair is going to take place late 1861, November, December, and then into early January 1862. And understand at this point in 1861, and Dr. Kelly may go over some of what's going on in the war prior to this, but it's generally a stalemate for all intents and purposes. The Union has had some success. They've taken over New Orleans. They've done pretty well in the Tennessee area at this point. But it's cost them a lot of money, a lot of lives of men. There's been a lot of casualties. And so the stalemate really favors the Confederacy. The Confederacy, its goal is just to basically hold on until it can get recognized, especially by the great powers at the time, which are France and Great Britain. And so if they can just kind of hold the stalemate and get recognized by those two, then hopefully they can get the popular support in the North and the Union to shift and basically desert Lincoln and force Lincoln to accept the Southern Confederacy. Also playing on around in the background here is that there are many aristocrats in Europe that hold a favorable view of the Confederacy, mainly because they view it as a sister aristocracy in America. Most of the aristocrats in Europe are anti-slavery, actually, but they want to support the Confederacy. Furthermore, a lot of the political leaders are looking to show that American democracy is a failure, and that the aristocracy of Europe is the way to go. Look, even the Americans, even the Confederates have figured this out and broken away from those evil, tyrannical, Northern democratic abolitionist, kind of crazy people. And this works for two purposes. One, it validates a lot of European aristocrats' leadership and authority. And furthermore, they're looking to put down, some democratic and socialist movements that are going on in their country. Don't forget, just before this, Marx and Engels have put out the Communist Manifesto. So the beginnings of a more democratic and or socialist Europe is starting to be in the works, and the leaders don't like that. Okay, so what is the Trent Affair? The Trent is the name of a British mail ship And basically what happens, oh, and we don't have him, James Mason of Virginia there, and Mr. Slidell of Louisiana, that's covered up, are two Confederate government officials that are going to be sent. One's going to be sent to Great Britain, one's going to be sent to France to form diplomatic relations. They're basically emissaries or diplomats. They escape out of Charleston Harbor. They find their way to Cuba, where they wait several weeks to board a British mail ship to take them to Britain, and then they'll divide from there. While that's going on, a Union warship is returning from the African coast named the San Jacinto. There's a Texas connection there. And the San Jacinto also stays in the same port in Cuba as these two gentlemen, and the captain learns that these two gentlemen are going to board the British steamer and go off to Europe. And so when the British steamer, the Trent, leaves out of the Cuban harbor of Havana, the Union warship San Jacinto stops them, boards the British steamer, and basically imprisons these two gentlemen, takes these two gentlemen off the Trent, puts it on the Union warship. And that's kind of a big no-no in international rule of the sea at the time. So what ends up happening? So Mason and Slidell get imprisoned in Boston, Fort Warren, named after a distant relation of the current senator there. This is a huge outrage in Great Britain. At this point, Great Britain is still the preeminent power in the world. And so having kind of the upstart Union, abduct people from an official British mail ship, it's an official government mail ship, it's not just a passenger liner, is seen as out of bounds. Thankfully for Lincoln, he has Charles Francis Adams, the grandson and son of the Adams two presidents in Great Britain, and he explains that this was not the orders of Lincoln, that the San Jacinto's captain went out of bounds in doing this, should not have done this. But Great Britain, they're pretty steamed about this, and so they prepare to send 11,000 soldiers to Canada, and they put their fleet on war footing. They come very close to possibly declaring war on the Union, on the North, and coming in on the side of the Confederacy. The Parliament and Crown basically proposed to suspend arms sales and gunpowder to the Union and kind of do there for a little bit. Remember, there's no direct communication, so it takes weeks for ships to sail across the Atlantic back and forth between Washington and London to figure out all of these things. In the end, the Parliament passes, and the Prime Minister sends a strongly worded diplomatic message to Lincoln. But first, it goes by Queen Victoria, and it actually gets edited by Prince Albert shortly before his death. And it basically says, hey, look, Union, you need to apologize, and you need to release those gentlemen. And if you do that, then we'll kind of let this slide. France, while this is going on, vows to remain neutral if the Union and the United Kingdom go to war. So good job, France. Back home in at least in the North, in the Union, a lot of other things are going on. Financial markets in the United States are sent into a panic because they think we're about to have a war with Great Britain. Solomon P. Chase of Chase Bank that we all know of today is in Lincoln's cabinet, is one of his, I think it's his Secretary of Treasury, and he's unable to sell his railroad shares because there's so much financial panic going on, and people in Lincoln's cabinet were literally personally supporting the war at this point. Some of the very wealthy bankers were basically lending money directly to the Union, and they're unable to do so because everyone thinks we're going to go to war with Great Britain. And even coinage gets stopped being used, and this, because of this financial panic, what was called the greenback, what is the green dollar that we know today, really becomes into circulation for the first time in a national, or at least the northern national scale. So that's another outcome of this. So basically, Mason and Slidell are released eventually from prison, allowed to go to Great Britain and France. Lincoln and the Union offer their official apology to Great Britain. It should not be discounted how big of a political task this was for Lincoln. Most people in the North were quite happy with the imprisonment of Mason and Slidell. They did not view them as actual diplomatic envoys, but as, rogue members of the Union who should be or treason or traitors. So it takes a lot of finesse and a lot of heat by Lincoln to make this apology, to get it past Congress, to resolve this diplomatically, but thankfully it does in the end. So the Trent affair was a big diplomatic snafu between the Union and Great Britain, because the Union warship San Jacinto had stopped the British mailer Trent and had confiscated two Confederate diplomats, Mason and Slidell. Thankfully, this all gets resolved a little after Christmas, 1861, and the two Confederate diplomats are released, and Lincoln makes an apology, and Great Britain stays neutral during the war and continues to supply the Union with war supplies after this. So that's the Trent Affair.